Toby, great to have you here. Now, you guys may have heard of x15 Ventures, Commbank's venture scaler, focused on building, investing and acquiring ventures that can deliver the next generation of digital solutions. It was launched, funnily enough, just over 12 months ago in February 2020, and didn't that create an interesting year for Managing Director Toby Norton-Smith? Please welcome him to the stage as he shares some of the key learnings and wins from the past 18 months of adventure in how Australia's largest bank is working with Fintechs. Toby, please come on up. Great to have you here. Put your hands together. I'm going to clear the mics out of the way.
I have a mic? Or?
You'd like a mic?
Just in case I wander.
Just don't fall off.
Testing. Whoops. Right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for choosing to stay in this room. I think this is the first time, maybe I'm the beneficiary of inertia, but I think this is the first time there's another event on as well. And look, I'm very conscious that a topic like how fintechs and banks can work well together, how corporates and startups can work well together, is a pretty well-trodden sort of topic of conversation at events like this. But you're not going to regret staying, because I'm pretty excited about the efforts x15 is making in pushing into this space. So I hope that's of interest to some of you today, to entrepreneurs that may be thinking about how to build or scale their venture, to investors or to existing ventures that are keen to have a chat. I thought I'd start with a little bit of context about x15 Ventures itself so that we can sort of get into that topic. As Simon touched on, you know, in some senses we're a startup ourselves. We launched in February 2020, which was just before COVID got really serious, you know, which for a business that's focused on helping, you know, digital businesses reimagine services actually was a tailwind from my perspective. And we're called x15 Ventures for a couple of reasons. The first is because it's really central to our mission to plug ventures into the 15 million business and consumer customers that our parent entity, Commbank, has. You know, that's really central to our mission. But there's a second reason, and actually the real reason we're called x15 Ventures, which is this: the x15 rocket-propelled test aircraft, which is for a decade underpinned the NASA Apollo program. It's where then pilots like Neil Armstrong actually had their first glimpses and flew to the edge of space. And yes, we had a bit of a strikeout with our branding agency, and like many good startups, it was a couple of nights before we launched that we were working out what to call ourselves, and maybe there were too many engineers in the room, but space and sort of tech ideas came to the fore. But this one really resonated for us because of, you know, this probably less known fact about the x15, which is that it couldn't do what it did without the help of a very substantial big brother. You know, in the case of the x15 craft, it was a B-52 bomber that actually hauled it up to the edge of space before it ignited the rockets and got going. We thought that that analogy was pretty apt for the intent and expectation that we have from our corporate partner, Commbank, which is that we expect that the greatest value they'll deliver us is actually not the funding that they're providing us, it's the very specific lift from deep and tech-driven integrations that are going to help these ventures to scale. So that's the real story behind why we called ourselves x15. So when we launched, we sort of shared an ambition. We said, let's launch and scale at least 25 ventures in the next 5 years, and let's earn a 2 to 3 times return on that portfolio. It's obviously early days. You know, from my perspective, we're on track. We're on track not just because of the velocity that we've shown early with primarily building ventures, increasingly investing and acquiring ventures, but because we're starting to crack, you know, what I think is the real problem we should be cracking, which is how we can take a business like Home-In, a e-conveyancing platform that allows lenders, conveyancers and consumers to really seamlessly move into and settle on their home, how we can take a business like that and hyperscale it. how we can plug it deeply into an enterprise partner and create a new distribution channel for it really to realize its ambitions and become like a really significant business. So that's the promise. The challenge to overcome is the well-worn topic of conversation at these events, which is how do you bring and combine the agility of a startup, with the scale of a corporate? Or how do you introduce a fintech or a startup and plug them successfully into a corporate? And I know everyone in this room will have a perspective and probably an experience on how hard that is. And I think we'll all have different views on what those barriers are. And I think every one of those ones that I've put up there, has truth in it. But for me, the fundamental barrier to how that happens is actually a slightly unsexy word: compliance. Apologies if there's any risk and compliance officers in the room. And what I mean by that is the real challenge is how a large corporate, how they can get comfort that the thousands of very appropriate obligations and regulations that they track to and think about, how they can get comfort, verify and understand that a third party, a startup that they want to work with, is meeting those obligations, or those obligations aren't relevant. So what I'm alluding to there is that exercise is not about whether a startup has good risk management practices. Startups, for the benefit of a lot of particularly cloud-based tech now, and I know there's a lot of great reg tech businesses presenting in the next couple of days, they can have exceptional quality of risk management. The challenge is a translation exercise. And that's a really hard exercise to give a corporate, which has obligations to regulators and a scale of customers, which means they can't make a mistake, how you can translate and give them comfort that those obligations are being met. So I've got conviction on that this slightly unsexy explanation might explain why it's so hard. I've got conviction on that probably from past trial and error that actually I've been through within Commbank. Before x15, I worked for a couple of years inside Commbank's digital business. And we really learned a lot from trying to do venturing in that environment. Example one that I've chosen, we built in late 2016, early 2017, we built an identity API that allowed a Commbank customer to leverage their security credentials to assert and confirm that they were who they said they were. In this case, our pilot partner was Airtasker, just when they were going through their badging strategy. We built that feature inside the technology environment and the risk and compliance processes of the bank. We built the feature and it had great reception from customers early on, but we quickly realized that we had built a feature when we'd missed the much bigger opportunity to build a venture. And to build a venture, you need to have a different orientation of people, of funding, resources, and capabilities to really sweat that customer experience, to iterate the product, to hack through business development, commercialization, and we weren't set up to do that because we'd built it as a project. Track forward about a year, and I had the privilege of being involved, in the early days or at the start of Beam It, which I hope many people in this room have got downloaded and use. It's a peer-to-peer payments app, much like Venmo in the US. And so, learning from that former experience, in this case, we said, well, let's get a team, let's build entirely outside the confines of the bank. Separate technology environment, separate people, separate processes. And the benefit of that was we built quickly. And we built what I think was a really beautiful user experience and a really great, innovative product. And we did it fast. The challenge, though, was when it then came to have time to scale it and to get the support of our then 3 bank investors to support scaling that in a space which is really appropriately regulated, the movement of money between people. We actually spent more time in that translation exercise of making sure that those 3 entities could get comfortable that that service met or exceeded the obligations that faced a service like that. And that was the challenge. We lost time, and we compromised on the product to some extent to do that translation exercise. So from those learnings, really came the thinking around X15. Now, I thought I'd just briefly orientate you on the sort of corporate venturing environment that probably many of you in this room are familiar with. Some of our peers at other banks have had great success with a CVC model. There's obviously a lot of accelerators and incubators available to ventures locally and internationally. What we describe ourselves as is a little bit different. It's a venture scaler. From one perspective, we've got quite a broad mandate. We've got the resources to both build, to acquire or invest in ventures. Where we sharpen our focus, or what distinguishes us, is this requirement that we have to have a very, very active relationship to any venture we're involved in. We have to be able to explain how we will specifically be able to benefit that venture from access to the assets of the parent organisation. So if we take a little bit of a deeper look at that, where we stand now, we think of ourselves as a platform. And that's a platform which we call xStack, maybe not that imaginatively, which is a set of technology and services that we're building out that really ensures that a venture can plug into CBA's assets and can plug in a way that's sort of effectively pre-baked or has translated those compliance concerns that a large corporate typically has. That's what we're seeking to do, that handshake between a venture and a corporate. If we go a little bit deeper on xStack, and there are architectural diagrams that go a lot deeper than this, I hope you can read this. xStack really comprises 4 things that we offer a venture. The first is enterprise-grade sort of venturing in a box technology. Now, I should be really clear, we're not prescriptive to any founder or any venture on the technology choices they want to make and how they want to build their venture. Where we do see, though, tremendous lift is in common sort of workflow, in common code repository, and actually workplace tooling that allows really effective communication between X15 and a venture. Second thing we offer is shared services. Again, I think many people in this room would be familiar with the challenges as a founder of wanting to obsess and sweat and think about your product and your customers, but actually realizing that there are a whole range of other expertises and skill sets that you need early in a venture's journey, be it legal support, be it growth marketing, be it even early engineering or design support. And we provide some of those services to ventures on call, particularly earlier stage ventures. And then the magic happens, and I keep bashing up on the word compliance, but it's integrated compliance is the third component of xStack. And this is where we're looking to shift compliance activity out of the traditional corporate model of being a PowerPoint and paper-based process where you effectively abstract the work that your development teams have done to work out if you're comfortable with the compliance processes. And instead, we shift all of that activity to the left, and we actually integrate it into the day-to-day work of the teams that are developing products and that are continuously deploying those products. So that's a lot of words, and it's hard to sort of explain that in a few minutes I've got available. Let me just give a couple of examples to hopefully bring that to life. One of the obvious compliance activities is change management. How does a regulator, how does a corporate, how does a startup get comfortable that as their product iterates, as they change something, that they haven't realized unacceptable risk? And so, to handle change management, we've actually got a working prototype now that ensures that as code is evolved through Git and Jira, we ensure that every change has purpose. And depending on what code is being changed, for example, whether it touches a customer data set, whether the code file owner ties back to, say, a privacy notice, for example, that will trigger different workflows in Git and Jira that will ensure that the change is, where appropriate, rationalized, and not by someone abstractly, by the engineer, that testing is verified or attached, and that authorizing it, if required, occurs in that flow. So we're really looking to push all of that compliance activity to be part of the daily activity of the teams. What really excites me is the next step beyond that. Now that we've built that database, now that we've built that workflow, applying machine learning on top of that is sort of the great hope for actually how you can identify new relationships and new areas that your compliance might look into. I'll give one other example, cyber, front and center for every digital business. Some of the heavy work that we've been doing in X15 is not reimagining, the security tools that come with many of the sort of hosted environments and services that you can consume through them, but actually doing the heavy lifting of understanding and unpicking the regulatory requirements around cyber, for example, CPS 234, and actually interpreting what that means for different ventures of different type and different scale, and then tracking that back to a set of security settings within those environments that are effectively pre-baked. So when a venture comes to x15 or starts through x15, they can actually fire up a default security posture which reflects what we think are the nature of their obligations. So I'll pause there on the detail of all of that, but that sort of hopefully brings to life the approach we're taking on trying to solve that compliance translation exercise. If we do all of those three things in xStack, there's one fourth thing that xStack offers, and that's really the trade-off or the payback. And that's a gateway through to CBA's assets. Now, that's a metaphorical gateway in most instances. In some instances, it's actually a very real gateway through to certain APIs that a venture can consume to reach out to customers. And so I thought we'd jump into some examples on what that could look like and some of the traction of our ventures that have gone through that process and sit on xStack. Rather than speaking through the ventures, let me talk about the learnings, because I think that'll be more valuable to you if you're thinking about this proposition. We've learned a few things. Firstly, targeting. Targeting really matters. What I mean by that is a lot of sort of large enterprises will be quite proud of their number of customers. Commbank's got 8 million digitally active customers. But one of our very early learnings was actually that sort of pales in comparison to the depth of engagement that some global technology platforms have. So if you really want to extract value from that channel, you need to be really hyper-targeted in how you use data to present a product in a way that is relevant to a customer in a banking environment. To use one example of Vonto, which is a small business insights platform that sucks in about, it's got integrations with 10 different sort of common tools that a small business owner will use, be it cloud accounting, be it e-commerce, be it sort of social and etc. Sucks that into one place. What we've found is tremendous lift as we start targeting customers based on those services that they're consuming, which we can see through banking payments data. And we've got activation rates now for customers that are astronomical, 50% activation rates for customers that are targeted that way. Learning number two, related to the first, is that targeting is not enough. You need to target the customer at the right time, at a moment that matters to them. A couple of examples there, Home-In, which is going through this astronomical growth at the moment. We're targeting customers when they've been pre-approved for a mortgage, when they're thinking about something that no one really wants to think about, conveyancing. And that's working. Another example would be Credit Savvy, which is a free service to access your credit scores. We found complaints volumes for Commbank have dropped 30% for customers that are declined, when we offer them that service at the back end of a decline. Third learning would be, this activity does not come at the cost of customer satisfaction. It should actually enhance customer satisfaction if it's done well. None of these are ad units inside of a banking app. And what we've learned, I'll use the Home-In example again, is that if you build that experience in an integrated way, if a customer understands why you've offered them something and they're in control from understanding what data they may want to transfer over to a new service and move into that experience, it actually enhances their satisfaction. For customers that have used Home-In, NPS is now tracking well above 70. And that's because they're in control. Last learning that we found is that the benefits, I think, of integrating, if you can pull it off with an enterprise partner, are quite broad. I think everyone goes immediately to distribution benefits, to funding. I'll touch on the first acquisition we've done, Doshi, which is a platform that integrates all the different online tooling that is necessary to run a hospitality business. We only acquired that a few months ago and actually haven't done anything yet in terms of integration with Commbank. We've already found tremendous lift though. X15 explaining their intentions in acquiring that as a strategic owner, explaining that we intend for it to be a utility for the whole industry, open to all merchants, has actually seen this real flow through of customers and partners wanting to jump onto the platform because of the intent that we've expressed for really being in this for the long haul. So, hopefully that brings to life some of the learnings of getting on xStack and how you can actually accelerate through a corporate partner. So that's sort of what we're trying to solve for, how we can scale ventures. Sounds pretty good. Look, I thought I'd be candid about some of the trade-offs that we're seeing, because there are trade-offs, and it won't be for everyone. The first is velocity. While everyone in our team is, extremely focused on getting as close as possible to the operating environment, the speed of a classic startup, there is some trade-off for velocity. We hope that trade-off is a trade-off for quicker scalability. Doing some of that compliance translation up front so that when you're ready to scale, you can scale not just through Commbank, but potentially any other enterprise that would have the same set of questions. Autonomy. We are an active investor. We are an active inquirer. We are an active builder. A CEO of a venture may feel less autonomy than a classic startup. We hope that comes at the trade-off of some people actually really relishing the support they get from different sources. And lastly, incentive. Every venture, every person working in a venture is incentivized on the value creation of that venture, but then they don't all have classic equity models. So again, the trade-off would be potentially less upside and reward for hopefully less risk for that individual. Where are we going? What we're seeing is that set of trade-offs is probably best understood and most attractive to, maybe it's an unkind way to describe them, but to seasoned entrepreneurs. People who have at least been through the startup journey once before and sort of who understand some of the benefits and trade-offs of, getting that distribution partner and brand support from a large enterprise. Payables, the first public minority investment that we've made, where an entrepreneur's approached us to be the lead, to be a follow-on investor for them. And I know Elliot's here at Intersect over the next couple of days if anyone wants to have a chat with him. That's a busy slide, and even on a 10-metre screen, you're not going to read that, so I won't try and run through it, but I think, if I spent the majority of time trying to explain, what x15 does, how we're trying to solve for that question of plugging a venture into a large corporate owner, the obvious question might be, what are the ventures that we're interested in? Where do we think we can add value to your venture? And that's too much to run through. Let me touch on the two very broad areas, though, that we focus on. The first is anything that complements or competes with a banking product. We haven't yet released anything. We will this year, but we absolutely have a mandate either to plug gaps where we think Commbank doesn't have a financial product that could be valuable, or to compete with Commbank where that makes sense as well. Bucket number two is anything that sits in and around the banking experience, a natural extension for a customer who's in the flow of consuming a banking product, going through a process of applying for a banking product. That is a very, very broad category. I think the areas where it clearly lights up for us and where we feel we can add value as an investor, as a partner, is in home and housing, in anything to do with the cost and management of your sort of everyday lives, anything that can support a small business. And lastly, probably the most interesting space is any business model where that business tries to connect small business and business customers, because clearly in our partner of Commbank, they do similar, and so we see real opportunity to support them. That's it, as it appears. I think we were going to finish there with really a call to action from me, which was, if that's of interest to you, please grab me after this. I'd be really keen to chat, really keen to understand if there's a fit for your venture or if we can help you out. But on that note, thank you very much for your time and look forward to catching up.
Don't disappear, Toby, because I do want to open to the